I've been in law enforcement for over 20 years. I've dealt with criminals, con artists, and liars of every variety. But nothing prepares you for the audacity of people who think they have power when they don't. It started with a letter. I found it crammed into my mailbox. The envelope slightly torn as if someone had shoved it in with more force than necessary. No return address, just my name printed in bold, black letters. I tore it open, expecting some local notice. Maybe a reminder about an upcoming neighborhood meeting. Instead, my eyes landed on the first few lines, and my gut tightened. Official violation notice. Immediate compliance required. I scanned the paper. It was a formal warning from the Homeowners Association stating that my mailbox was non-compliant with community aesthetic guidelines. According to them, my black metal mailbox was supposed to be almond-colored, a rule I had never heard of, let alone agreed to. The kicker? They were fining me $500 for non-compliance. If I didn't pay within 10 days, they threatened further action, including legal proceedings and potential liens against my property. I let out a short laugh, more out of disbelief than amusement. Legal proceedings? Over a mailbox? I lived in this neighborhood for 5 years, and not once had I seen any HOA representative enforce anything. Hell, I didn't even remember there being an active HOA. And yet, here they were, throwing around threats like they were a branch of the government. I flipped the paper over, checking for any signatures. The bottom of the notice was stamped with an official-looking HOA compliance office seal, but something about it didn't sit right with me. No names, no contact number, just a P.O. box for sending payments. Who the hell do these people think they are? I folded the letter and set it on the counter, staring at it like it might change under my gaze. My instincts were kicking in, that deep, unshakable feeling that something wasn't right. I had seen real enforcement. This wasn't it. I grabbed my phone and called one of my neighbors, Jim, a retired Army vet who'd lived here longer than I had. Jim, you ever heard of this HOA compliance office? A pause, then a chuckle. They got to you too, huh? That's when I knew this was just the beginning. Hey, real quick, if you're enjoying the video so far, make sure to hit that like button, share it with friends, and subscribe for more awesome content. It really helps out the channel. And while you're at it, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. All right, let's keep going. I didn't have to wait long before they showed up. 2 men, both wearing dark polo shirts with HOA compliance officer embroidered in cheap gold thread, walked up my driveway like they owned the place. One was tall and wiry, his face set in a permanent scowl. The other was built like a bulldog, short, broad, and exuding the kind of fake confidence I'd seen in too many small-time grifters. I stood on my porch, arms crossed, watching them approach. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice even. The taller one took the lead, flipping open a black leather wallet that almost looked like a badge holder, except there was no actual badge inside, just a laminated card with HOA Compliance Division printed on it, next to what I could only assume was his name. "Sir, we're here regarding a violation notice issued to this property," he said, slipping the wallet back into his pocket. His tone was the kind that dared me to argue. I let out a slow breath, already feeling the irritation creep up my spine. "Oh, yeah? What kind of violation?" The shorter one, Bulldog, stepped forward, tapping a clipboard with his pen. "Your mailbox, Sheriff," he said like he was relishing the moment. "You were given 10 days to comply with the community guidelines. That deadline is almost up." I raised an eyebrow. "And?" Tall guy sighed, like he was dealing with a difficult child. "And failure to comply means additional penalties. If necessary, we can escalate this to legal action or even a lien on your property." I took a slow step forward, close enough to see the sweat forming at Bulldog's hairline. "You can escalate it to whatever you want," I said, my voice dropping, just enough to make them shift uncomfortably. "But first, tell me, where exactly do you two get your authority?" Tall guy blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," I said, scanning them up and down. "You're not law enforcement. You're not city officials. Hell, you're not even properly licensed security guards. So, tell me, what exactly gives you the right to threaten legal action against a homeowner?" Bulldog's jaw tightened. Sir, we represent the Homeowners Association. Everyone in this community agreed to abide by the rules. I cut him off with a sharp laugh. That's so? Funny? Because I don't recall signing any contract giving you the right to show up on my property and issue threats. Tall guy's face twitched. This isn't a discussion. The rules apply to everyone. That includes you. There it was, that flicker of arrogance. The belief that if you act like you have power, people will just assume you do. I let the silence stretch between us for a beat before I spoke again. I've been in law enforcement for over 2 decades, I said, stepping closer, my eyes locked onto theirs. And I know a fake badge when I see one. So why don't you two tell me the real story? Who sent you? And where exactly does all this fine money go? For the first time, neither of them had an answer. Bulldog shifted his weight, his eyes darting to Tall Guy, looking for backup. Tall Guy clenched his jaw, but I could see it, the slight hesitation, the realization that I wasn't some clueless homeowner they could bully into compliance. We don't have to explain ourselves to you, he finally said, stiffening his spine. You'll get a final notice in the mail. I smirked. I'll be waiting. They turned and walked back down my driveway, their postures a little less confident than when they'd arrived. I watched them go, my mind already working. Something was off. These guys weren't just overzealous HOA board members. There was something bigger at play here. Something they didn't want me looking into. And now, I damn well was. I wasn't the type to let things slide, especially when something didn't sit right. And these so-called HOA enforcers, they were the definition of suspicious. After they left my property, I sat at my kitchen table, their flimsy violation notice spread out in front of me. I wasn't just dealing with a pushy HOA. There was something bigger here. So, I started digging. First stop? My neighbors. Jim, the retired Army vet next door, was the first call I made. He picked up on the second ring. Sheriff, he greeted, his voice rough from years of smoking. I was wondering when you'd get fed up with those clowns. That got my attention. You've had run-ins with them? Jim let out a dry chuckle. Hell yeah. Last month they fined me $1,000 for having an unauthorized security camera. I frowned. On your own house. That's what I said. Jim grunted. Told them to pound sand. They kept sending threats but never followed through. That was just the beginning. I spoke to 5 more homeowners. Same pattern. Bogus violations, random fines, threats of legal action. But here's the kicker. No one had ever actually seen the so-called HOA board in person. Everything was done through letters, emails, or those 2 fake enforcers showing up unannounced. That wasn't how an HOA was supposed to work. Time to go straight to the source. The HOA compliance office was located in a rundown strip mall on the edge of town, squeezed between a payday loan shop and a shady used car dealership. I parked my cruiser right out front and stepped inside. The interior was as unimpressive as the location. Fluorescent lighting, cheap office furniture, and walls lined with outdated community posters. A single desk sat at the center of the room, behind which sat a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper attitude. She barely looked up from her computer. Can I help you? I pulled the violation notice from my pocket and set it on her desk. Yeah, I've got some questions about this. She gave it a disinterested glance. All disputes must be filed in writing. I held my ground. I'm not here to file a dispute. I want to speak to the HOA board. She smirked, finally looking up at me. The board doesn't take walk-ins. Then set me an appointment. She sighed as if I was asking for the world. They're unavailable right now. I narrowed my eyes. For how long? She clicked her pen twice. Indefinitely. Now that was interesting. I leaned in slightly. And who exactly is the HOA president? Her smirk faltered just a little. That information isn't public. I let that sit for a second. Not public? I echoed, keeping my voice calm. You're running an association that fines homeowners, threatens legal action, and enforces so-called rules. And the people in charge don't have names? She tapped her fingers against the desk, clearly irritated. Sir, if you have concerns, you can submit them in writing. That's all I can tell you. I exhaled slowly, my patience thinning. Oh, you've told me plenty. I grabbed the notice and turned to leave, but as I reached the door, I heard the faint click of a lock engaging behind me. I didn't look back, but I smiled to myself. They were hiding something, and I was going to find out what. Back at my office, I sat at my desk, the so-called HOA violation notice staring back at me like a bad joke. Something about the whole thing felt off. Not just the enforcers acting like they had real authority, but the way the HOA itself operated. No real board, no public information, no accountability. I wasn't letting this go. I opened my laptop and started digging into their legal status. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. Every legally recognized homeowners association has to be registered with the state. Their rules, board members, and financials, all public record. But when I searched for our HOA's registration, I found nothing. No valid filings, no records of board meetings, no tax forms, just one expired business license, not an HOA charter, linked to a limited liability company, LLC, that had been dissolved over a year ago. That's interesting. An HOA that wasn't legally an HOA? Now, that was a problem. Next, I dug into the names attached to the expired LLC. Two popped up: George Whitman, listed as the president; Terry Blanchard, registered as the treasurer. Neither name meant anything to me at first, so I ran them through our law enforcement database. And that's when things got real interesting. Terry Blanchard was clean. A ghost, really. No online presence, no history. That alone was weird. But George Whitman had a record: 2 counts of fraud, 1 count of embezzlement, a history of running shady business schemes under different LLCs, and yet, here he was, running a fake HOA, sending out bogus fines, and threatening homeowners with legal action he had no authority to enforce. This wasn't about neighborhood rules. This was a scam. With the pieces falling into place, I turned my attention to the 2 men who had shown up at my house, the so-called HOA compliance officers. Real security personnel need state-issued licenses to operate. I ran their descriptions and badge numbers through the database. Nothing. No security credentials. No employment records. Just 2 unlicensed hired goons pretending to be something they weren't. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. This was worse than I thought. Here's what I knew so far. The HOA wasn't legally registered. The fines and liens were bogus. Just a way to extort homeowners. The enforcers weren't real security officers, just muscle. The HOA president was a convicted fraudster. This wasn't about community upkeep. This was about money. Whitman and his crew had set up a fake HOA, using official-looking letters and intimidation tactics to scam homeowners out of thousands in bogus fines. But the part that really made my blood boil? They weren't just scamming people. They were scaring them into paying. Elderly residents, single parents, veterans like Jim, people who didn't know the law well enough to push back. That ended now. I grabbed my keys and my badge. It was time to pay Mr. Whitman a visit. I've taken down con artists before. The trick isn't just proving they're lying, it's making them lie when they think they're in control. And that's exactly what I planned to do. With everything I had dug up, the fake HOA, the bogus fines, the hired muscle, I knew these guys weren't just playing pretend, they were running a full-scale scam. But knowing it and proving it were 2 different things. So I decided to give them an opportunity they couldn't resist. I was going to be just another helpless homeowner. The next morning, I took off my badge, swapped my uniform for an old t-shirt and jeans, and parked my truck a few blocks away from my house. If these guys were doing their usual rounds, I didn't want them recognizing my vehicle right away. Then, I made myself visible, watering my lawn, pretending to check my mailbox, looking like any other unsuspecting resident. I didn't have to wait long. A black SUV crawled down the street, stopping 2 houses down. The same 2 guys, Bulldog and Tall Guy, stepped out, clipboards in hand, acting like they owned the place. I watched as they knocked on a neighbor's door, exchanged some words, and handed over a fine notice. The homeowner, a woman in her 60s, looked visibly shaken. That was enough for me. Time to reel them in. I stepped forward, pretending I had just noticed them. "Hey, you guys with the HOA?" Bulldog turned, sizing me up. "That's right. You got a violation notice?" I frowned, playing dumb. I don't know. I got something in the mail a while back about my mailbox or something? Tall guy flipped through his clipboard. What's your address? I gave it to them, and just like that, he pulled out a bright red final notice paper, already written up. Yeah, you're in violation. Your mailbox is non-compliant. Fine's now $1,000 since you ignored the first one. I whistled low. $1,000? That's crazy. Bulldog stepped forward, lowering his voice like he was doing me a favor. You don't want this going further, trust me. If you don't pay, we can escalate to legal action. At that point, you're looking at liens, collections, even foreclosure, man. There it was. The threat that had scared my neighbors into paying. I crossed my arms. You can foreclose on my house over a mailbox? Tall guy nodded. Absolutely, we've done it before. Lie. But a dangerous one. I let out a dramatic sigh and rubbed the back of my neck. All right, look, I don't have $1,000 lying around. Can I, work something out? Bulldog smirked. Cash works. We can take care of it off the books. Gotcha. I reached into my pocket, pretending to pull out my wallet. Instead, I pulled out my phone, already recording. I lifted it so they could see the screen. You two just extorted a law enforcement officer on record. Their smirks vanished. Tall guy took a step back. Bulldog's face turned red. What the? I pulled out my badge next, flipping it open. George Whitman's little scam is over. You're both going down for fraud, harassment, and impersonation. Bulldog bolted. Tall guy hesitated a second too long. I grabbed his wrist before he could run. Not so fast. His clipboard clattered to the ground. The red final notice slipped free, landing face up on the pavement. This time, they were the ones who looked helpless. Tall guy's wrist was locked in my grip, his breath coming in quick, panicked bursts. His buddy, Bulldog, had already taken off, but I wasn't too worried about him. He wasn't getting far. You don't know what you're doing, Tall guy stammered, his eyes darting around the neighborhood, probably hoping someone would come to his rescue. I tightened my hold just enough to remind him who was in control. Oh, I know exactly what I'm doing, I said, pulling out my phone again. I tapped the screen, replaying his own words back to him. We can escalate to legal action, liens, collections, even foreclosure. His face drained of color. That's fraud, intimidation, and attempted extortion, I said calmly. And I got it all on record. Behind me, a few curious neighbors had stepped onto their porches, watching the scene unfold. A couple of them had probably been bullied by these guys before. Not today. I let go of Tall guy's wrist, but he didn't run. He knew he was cooked. Now, I continued, straightening up. Here's what's going to happen. We're going to take a little drive over to the HOA office, and you're going to introduce me to your boss. Tall guy swallowed hard. Don't lie to me. I cut him off. George Whitman, the guy running this scam. We're going to see him. Now. And just like that, I had my in. The HOA office looked even more pathetic than last time, like a cheap front for a business that didn't want to be found. Tall guy led the way, his shoulders slumped, knowing he had no way out of this. Inside, the same rude secretary sat at her desk, tapping at her keyboard. She barely glanced. Up. Mr. Whitman, I said. Tell him it's urgent. Her expression didn't change. Mr. Whitman doesn't take walk-ins. I leaned in. Oh, he'll take this one. I pulled out my badge and set the phony violation notices on the desk. Tell him law enforcement is here about his fake HOA. She hesitated now, her fingers frozen over the keys. I could see the gears turning in her head. Run? Call someone? Deny everything? But before she could decide, a door in the back creaked open. And there he was. George Whitman. Whitman was exactly what I expected. Overweight, pasty, and looking like a man who had spent his life in the gray areas of the law. He wore a suit that didn't quite fit, and his eyes flicked between me and Tall guy, taking everything in. What's the meaning of this? He demanded. I took my time. The meaning of this, I said, stepping forward, is that your entire operation is a fraud. You're not a legally registered HOA, your fines are fake, your enforcers aren't real security. And you? I let my voice drop into something harder. You're a convicted fraudster running an extortion racket on innocent homeowners. Whitman scoffed, but I could see the sweat beating at his temple. This is ridiculous. We are a perfectly legal homeowners association. I tossed a folder onto the desk in front of him. Wrong. That's your expired business license. You're dissolved. LLC. No active registration, no legal authority. You're a nobody playing pretend. For the first time, Whitman hesitated. And then he did what conmen always do when the jig is up. He doubled down. I don't have to answer to you. He snapped. You have no jurisdiction over a private organization. Now get out before I call the police. I smirked. Oh, don't worry, they're already on their way. As if on cue, sirens wailed in the distance. Whitman's expression shifted from anger to pure panic. Behind me, tall guy looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. The secretary had already grabbed her purse and was slowly edging toward the back exit. Whitman scrambled. This is harassment! You can't just barge in here. I folded my arms. Funny, that's exactly what my neighbors said about your goons showing up on their doorsteps. Before Whitman could spew more nonsense, the front door burst open. 2 uniformed local police officers stepped inside, hands on their belts, eyes sweeping the room. One of them, Officer Daniels, spotted me and nodded. Sheriff, we got your call. Whitman's face turned red. This is outrageous. I want my lawyer. Good idea, I said. You'll need one. Daniels pulled out a warrant. George Whitman, you're under arrest for fraud, harassment, and criminal extortion. And just like that, the house of cards came crashing down. Whitman didn't go quietly. He shouted about lawsuits and legal rights all the way out the door, but it didn't matter. His little empire of fear was over. Tall guy and Bulldog, they weren't far behind, charged with impersonation and conspiracy. The neighborhood, finally free from their grip. As the squad car pulled away, I looked around at the gathered crowd, homeowners who had been bullied and threatened, now watching justice being served. Jim, my neighbor, clapped me on the back. Damn, Sheriff, he chuckled. Remind me never to get on your bad side. I smiled, watching the last of the fake enforcers disappear down the road. Just don't paint your mailbox the wrong color, I said. Whitman didn't go quietly. The moment the cuffs clicked around his wrists, he turned red with rage, sputtering a mix of legal threats and outright nonsense. This is illegal. You can't do this to me, he bellowed as Officer Daniels led him toward the squad car. I have rights. I stepped in front of him, arms crossed. Yeah? So do the people you've been extorting. I nodded toward the small crowd of homeowners gathering outside the HOA office, watching the downfall of the man who had been shaking them down for years. Tall guy and Bulldog weren't far behind. Both were zip-tied and sitting on the curb, looking anywhere but at me. The charge list against them was growing by the minute. Impersonation, harassment, conspiracy to commit fraud. Their days of playing pretend law enforcement were over. As the squad cars pulled away, taking Whitman and his hired muscle with them, I turned back to the neighbors. Some were shaking their heads, others just stood in stunned silence. Then Jim, my old Army vet neighbor, stepped forward. He gave me a long look, then let out a chuckle. Damn, Sheriff, that was a hell of a show. The tension broke. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Justice wasn't just served, it was celebrated. The next few days were a whirlwind of paperwork, investigations, and legal action. Turns out, Whitman's scam ran deep. He had embezzled thousands from residents, levying fake fines and pocketing the cash under the guise of community improvement fees. His bogus HOA had never done a single repair, never maintained any shared property, because there wasn't any shared property. There was no real HOA, just a paper-thin facade Whitman created to make himself rich. But it was over now. A judge ruled the entire operation null and void. Every fine, every lien, every fabricated violation notice. Gone. The HOA compliance office was shut down within a week, its cheap furniture and fake files hauled away as evidence. And the residents? They were finally free. A few evenings later, I was sitting on my front porch when I noticed something different about the neighborhood. People were outside, talking, laughing. A few kids rode their bikes down the street, something I hadn't seen in a while. Without the fake HOA breathing down their necks, people were relaxed again. Jim wandered over, beer in hand, and plopped down on the chair next to me. "So, Sheriff, does this mean we can finally paint our mailboxes whatever damn color we want?" I smirked. "Go wild, Jim." He took a swig and grinned. "Hell, I might paint mine bright pink, just because I can." I shook my head, chuckling. "Just don't expect me to write you a ticket if the neighbors complain." We sat in silence for a moment, watching as the sun dipped below the rooftops. The air was cooler now. The weight of fear and intimidation finally lifted. Then I stood, stretching. I should make the rounds. Let folks know they don't have to worry anymore. Jim gave me a nod. "Good idea. They trust you. Real law enforcement, not those clowns with fake badges." I walked down the sidewalk, stopping to chat with a few neighbors, reassuring them that the scam was over, that no one could threaten them again, because that's what real law enforcement does. We don't intimidate. We protect. In my years as a lawman, I've learned that power isn't always about who has the badge. It's about who believes they have the right to wield it. Whitman and his goons didn't carry real authority. They had no legal backing, no legitimate enforcement power. But that didn't stop them from convincing people they did. And for too long, it worked. They didn't need handcuffs or court orders, just threats, intimidation, and enough official-looking paperwork to make people scared. Fear is a powerful tool, and they wielded it like a weapon. Until someone pushed back, until someone challenged their authority. And that's the real lesson here. The truth is, there will always be people like Whitman. People who take advantage of fear, confusion, and blind compliance. They'll come wrapped in official-sounding titles. They'll wave fake documents and cite non-existent laws. They'll tell you what you have to do, hoping you'll never question them. But the moment you push back, demand proof, and call their bluff, their power crumbles. That's why I tell people, know your rights. If someone claims authority over you, make them prove it. Ask questions. If something doesn't feel right, dig deeper. Trust your instincts. Real authority doesn't need to scare you into submission, because the moment you stop questioning, that's when the real danger begins. After Whitman was hauled off to jail, after the fake HOA collapsed, and after the last of the bogus fines were wiped away, something changed in our neighborhood. People stood a little taller, spoke a little louder. They weren't afraid anymore, and that's what justice is supposed to do. It's not about punishing the guilty, it's about protecting the innocent. Whitman thought power was something you could fake, that a cheap badge and a phony title were enough to make people obey. But true power? True power isn't in a fake badge, it's in upholding the law. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, share it with friends, and subscribe for more awesome content. Don't forget to tap the bell icon to stay updated. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? Your support means the world.